In mid-20th century homes, especially back in the 1950s, the placement of a bed was not just about making a room look nice. It was a deliberate choice shaped by health concerns, safety protocols, and even, lingering wartime sensibilities. Unlike nowadays, where a window might be all about fresh air or a nice view, back then, putting a bed near a window was seen as risky, and folks went out of their way to avoid it. This wasn't just some old superstition. It was a calculated response to the living conditions, the climate, and the social habits of that era. Cold drafts were a real health hazard. In the 1950s, central heating systems just weren't as common as they are today. Most families relied on radiators, fireplaces, or stoves to keep warm, and, rooms tended to be heated unevenly. Windows, especially those single-pane ones, were major sources of heat loss. If you put a bed right by a window, the sleeper would be exposed to cold drafts all night long. Doctors back then often warned that being in cold air for too long could make things like bronchitis or asthma worse, or even lead to chronic colds. Families, especially those with young kids or elderly folks, were extra careful, usually putting beds along interior walls where warmth from stoves and radiators could circulate without any trouble. For folks today, like modern preppers or anyone interested in history, this bit of knowledge is still useful. When you're figuring out where to put sleeping spots in an off-grid cabin, a historic-style home, or even an emergency shelter, placing beds against insulated interior walls helps keep the heat in. It's a straightforward way to lower the risk of getting sick during long cold spells, just like families did back in the 1950s, almost by instinct. Beyond just the health risks, windows were also considered structural weak points. In the 1950s, a lot of post-war homes had these big sash or casement windows that were thin and single-glazed. They could break pretty easily, from storms, accidents, or even, local civil disturbances. So families were advised not to put beds near windows, just in case there was shattered glass or falling debris to worry about. This principle is still relevant today for anyone considering the safety of sleeping arrangements. A prepper setting up a bunker, for instance, would benefit from understanding that sleeping areas near windows introduce risk points. Reinforced or secondary egress windows are useful for ventilation, but they shouldn't be the primary location for a bed if the goal is safety under extreme conditions. The 1950s was also an era before blackout curtains were common in homes. Streetlights, passing cars, and moonlight could shine directly through unshielded windows. Health professionals of the time recognized that light exposure during sleep disrupted natural circadian rhythms, making rest less restorative. Placing a bed away from windows was an early recognition of this principle, long before modern sleep studies confirmed the impact of light on melatonin production and overall sleep quality. Today, this insight can be applied practically in modern off-grid or prepper homes by deliberately arranging sleeping quarters to minimize external light exposure. Even simple measures like thick curtains or strategic furniture placement mirror the historical reasoning of 1950s households, improving rest and maintaining alertness, critical in survival scenarios. Well, the shadow of World War II and the early Cold War lingered heavily into the 1950s. A whole lot of homes, schools, and community buildings followed those civil defense guidelines, all designed to protect folks from possible air raids or nuclear fallout. Now, windows were especially dangerous in these situations. Glass could shatter violently under pressure, sending shards flying across a room. So, families were trained to place beds against the walls farthest from exterior openings, just to minimize the chance of getting hurt. This kind of civil defense reasoning, it actually explains a practice that's still useful for modern historical reenactments, prepper shelters, or even just emergency planning. When you understand that beds near windows increase your exposure during structural failures or explosions, it lets folks recreate authentic safety measures. Plus, you can adopt strategies for current preparedness, like reinforcing window barriers or choosing interior walls for sleeping arrangements. Back in the 1950s, there just wasn't much in the way of air conditioning or advanced moisture control, honestly. Windows were pretty notorious for condensation, especially during cold winters or those humid summers. If you put a bed near a window, it could soak up dampness over time, leading to mold growth and mildew, both of which were known to cause breathing problems and just make folks sick in general. So families kind of instinctively avoided those spots, knowing that putting beds along interior walls kept things drier and healthier. So for modern preppers or, folks who just love history, this isn't just trivia. It's really actionable knowledge. When you're restoring vintage homes or maybe designing survival quarters, it's best to put beds against dry walls instead of right up against those moisture-prone window frames. Doing this cuts down on long-term health risks and helps make sure your bedding and sleeping spaces stay safe and comfortable, just like careful homeowners did back in the 1950s. Street traffic, passing trains, and all sorts of neighborhood activity could just pour right through those old single-pane windows, a problem that was even bigger in urban and suburban neighborhoods during the 1950s. Sleep was something folks really valued, and putting beds near windows just meant more noise. Placing beds against interior walls, though, naturally muffled those sounds. This right here is an early example of using smart spatial design to help folks get better rest. It's a principle that still makes sense today, especially for folks living off-grid or in survival setups, where cutting down on noise can be absolutely critical for staying alert during the day. While the 1950s might feel like a world away, the practical thinking behind where to put your bed is still mighty important today. For folks who are into survival, history, or just want to know how people used to live, the main points are pretty simple. Stick to interior walls to keep warm, stay safe, control moisture, and get a good night's sleep. Steering clear of windows helps you avoid cold drafts, broken glass, noise, and dampness, problems that honestly are still around in modern cabins, off-grid homes, or if you ever find yourself in an emergency shelter. Additionally, understanding these historical habits provides insight into broader societal priorities of the era. A focus on health, civil defense, and practical safety. Implementing similar strategies today allows for a historically informed approach to modern living, combining the wisdom of the past with contemporary needs. Even simple adjustments, such as using thick drapes, insulating window frames, or arranging beds to maximize wall coverage, are direct applications of what families were already doing, about 70 years ago. The 1950s approach to bed placement reflects a deeply practical mindset that modern survivalists and history enthusiasts can sure learn from. Health, safety, and environmental considerations guided every decision, creating living spaces that were safer, warmer, and, more comfortable. By studying these historical practices, we gain actionable strategies that apply to off-grid living, survival planning, and authentic historical restoration. If you're passionate about learning how everyday habits from the past can improve your modern home, cabin, or prepper setup, make sure to subscribe to Warfield Prepper Chronicles. Share this guide with fellow history buffs and survival enthusiasts so we can, preserve and apply the practical wisdom of the 1950s for generations to come.